Many thanks for making a date today. Welcome back. Now, the country is still at high risk of debt distress. This was contained in the latest debt sustainability analysis put together by the World Bank and the IMF. There's more in the following Business Desk report.
According to the World Bank and IMF, the country risk of external and overall debt distress continues to remain high. This warning is coming at a time Finance Minister Ken Ofori-Atta has announced several measures that should in the medium to long term help reduce the debt numbers, which stood at 198 billion cedis ending March this year. The Washington-based lenders in their latest report affirmed the country's status are still high because government has breached two of the debt sustainability analysis, like debt servicing to export and external debt service to revenue. The classification is more of a warning to investors and those that deal with the country that government could struggle to pay its debt on time because of its rising expenditure. In assessing the country's ability to pay its debt, the IMF and World Bank do not only look at the debt to GDP ratio, but also the present value of the debt to the GDP ratio, present value of debt to export, debt to revenue ratio, debt service to export, and debt service to revenue ratio. Meanwhile, in a separate report released by the World Bank, it is also warning that it does not see the classification being reviewed anytime soon. This is because vulnerabilities associated with debt service remains high. The bank also argues the debt outlook remains very high and prone to some shocks. The bank also sees the various stress tests done show that the economy is exposed to some serious shocks if revenue from exports decline. This warning could impact negatively on the country's cost of borrowing and even the private sector as well. Some have also argued that the situation could also impact negatively on the Ghana cedi in terms of stability if the situation should get out of hand.
So what would it take to review this high debt stress status or classification? That's a question George Rafe posed to country representative of the IMF, Dr. Albert Tuna Mama.
What I highlighted in the presentation was how pervasive it was to have high debt service compared to revenue collected. And, this gave an indication that there is also urgency, as, we've been repeating for years, that to increase domestic revenue mobilization, right? Because that's the way not only to find the necessary resources to cover, all these legitimate programs and spending, but also the way to reduce the debt stock. So this is where, some of the efforts that I'm talking about should be coming from. I mentioned in the presentation that work has been done on this tax exemption bill. It is our wish that it could be passed at some point because these are potentially low-hanging fruits that should bring much-needed revenue to the public purse.
And from what you're seeing, when would the fund take a decision on the fact that we've seen some improvement in the indicators and we could make a judgment on whether we'll move you to a favorable level or you still be classified as a high risk of debt distress?
It hinges on domestic revenue or tax revenue compared to GDP, the total income of the country. So the faster you can close this gap, the faster you can increase domestic revenue mobilization, the sooner you can be taken out from the high risk of debt distress category to the moderate risk of debt distress category. So I cannot give a time lag. I think it's just a function of how quick some measures are put in place that can work and bring the necessary yield to reduce that threshold, to reduce that ratio of debt service to revenue.
Do I get from you that, from your assessment, that the biggest threat or risk to the economy is revenue?
I'm not. You cannot call it a threat. I think that the risk that I mentioned, come from various sectors, the energy sector, some other vulnerabilities. But I look at revenues more as not a silver bullet, but an important lever that can actually help you address a lot of the issues that we see.
Meanwhile, former Finance Minister Setekpe has challenged government to prove its ability to keep debt levels down by ending the excessive borrowing. The IMF in June decided to place Ghana on a post-program monitoring after debt levels with the fund reached a little over $1 billion months after exiting the program. This has raised some questions over the government's inability or ability to pay its debt, as many of the measures put in place have failed. Seth Tekwe spoke to Joy Business.
As at the end of 2018, not even 2019 and going, that debt stock is higher than the 2016, debt stock.
But the argument they will make is that the economy has been rebased. And it's a fact. You actually began this process. And if you have rebased the economy, I mean...
That even strengthens my points, because, the debt to GDP ratio, which measures the debt stock, right? Remember, it's debt over GDP.
Yes.
So the GDP base has expanded, your denominator has expanded, by the rebasing and by additional crude oil.
Yes.
And yet still your debt to GDP ratio is higher than when it was one-fifth. And and remember, we are using the same rebase now to measure the 2016 balance.
Yes.
Yes. So it isn't that we are comparing apples with oranges. So the points you made, is the reason why the debt ratio should be down, not up. Because one, we are using the same rebase figures. Remember, it was started from 2013.
Yes.
Right? So the 2016, the stock is on the new basis, not the old. So we are comparing apple with apple, not apple with oranges, as used to be in the past. Right? And we are saying that it has been affected, one, by two big factors. One, the rebasing itself, which increased the GDP, the denominator, right, by 25%, and crude oil from 3 fields, not one. 2016 was one field. If you can't do with one, it will be difficult to manage with 2 or with 3. That's why we set out the mechanism. And let me repeat. By 2014, we realized that we have to change what you are talking about. Where you borrow, and want to repay in the future. 2 examples. You borrow even treasury bills. 90-day treasury bills means that at the end of 90 days, I'll pay you.
Yes.
We don't pay. We take new loan and then we refinance. Now we saw that habit falling into our sovereign bond, which was dangerous. Because when we borrowed in 2007, we were paying only interest. We were not paying down the principal.
All right, so it's been debt. Now, let's try to get some other information on our debt levels as a country and what exactly we are or we have been borrowing for over the past years leading to this mounting debt crisis. And I've been joined by Philip Namfuri, researcher here, to tell us more. Philip, you're welcome.
Thank you very much, Emmanuel.
So what exactly have you been borrowing for?
Okay, so our debt situation has been exacerbated because of our revenue and expenditure mismatch. We're not able to generate a lot within, and we spend on a lot.
So that's a question I've been asking many economists and stakeholders, and they seem not to be giving me the right answer. Why do we always have to set, outrageous, so to speak, objectives if we cannot meet them?
Well, apart from setting outrageous objectives, there's also what is referred to as structural rigidities. Things that exist in the budgets that we cannot do without. The payments we make for salaries and compensation, the interest payments we make on debt that we borrowed already, and then the statutory payments.
So these are recurrent, right?
Yes, recurrent expenditure. And you realize that there's very little left for capital expenditure. So if we want to finance capital expenditure, what do? We go and borrow. Then when we borrow, the debt is expensive. Dynamics change, foreign currency dynamics, interest rate dynamics, and we have to pay more. But first, before we get into the meat of that, I want us to look at how many other countries are in debt distress and what the dynamics are. So we have an infograph here that shows you that 7 countries, according to the IMF, are in debt distress. 25 countries are at high risk of debt distress. 26 of them are at moderate risk, and 14 countries are at low risk of debt distress. So you realize that the chunk of the countries that have problems are 25 countries at high risk of debt distress. And Ghana is part of the countries that are at high risk of debt distress. And when we say high risk of debt distress, our debt has become so large that it eats into what we should use for other productive ventures. So we're using all our money to service debts. And it's seen in our budgets. And it's been a problem since 2010, if I'm not wrong.
When you say all our monies, is it the monies that we receive through taxation or through exports?
Monies we generate domestically, our revenue. Most of it is used on 3 line items: the salaries and compensations, the interest payments on debt, and then the statutory payments. Now, when this new government came in place, they tried to change some stuff to help us with our expenditure, revenue, and our debt. Let's take a look at that infograph also. That shows the measures that government has put in place to help us.
So before you even get to this infograph, are we worse off compared to other countries, for instance, within the sector?
Okay, so each country has different dynamics. If you look at us like this, we are struggling to raise domestically. We depend a lot on commodities. That hasn't changed over the course of time. As far back as the days of Dr. Kwame Nkrumah, we are still dependent on commodities. We still haven't added enough value to change on that front. So in terms of our foreign receipts, we have a problem. Then again, within our shores, we also suffer to generate enough revenue.
All right, so let's get back to that infograph you're referring to and the expenditure management.
So government says they were going to enforce the Public Financial Management Act that oversees government finances. The Fiscal Council, you are well aware of it. The realignment of statutory funds, that's the earmark funds capping and realignment law, was also passed. And then the Treasury single account, where government consolidates all its finances with the Bank of Ghana, so that if there are any loopholes in commercial banks, government finances don't go there. Now, the question we have to ask ourselves is, all these measures have been put in place, but the IMF report that talks about the debt says they are not yielding the necessary results.
Why is it so?
Because, Mr. Waji, I would say our problem is quite stark. It will take a long time for us to solve some of these problems. But you see, raising revenue is one thing, expenditure is another thing. And there are a lot of things that need to be met. And there are a lot of projects, government has made promises, people's lives need to be better.
So that takes me back to my earlier question. Should we cut down on the number of projects or objectives that we set?
If we cut down, apart from cutting down, we must cut the waste in the system, because the waste, the corruption is one way some of these funds that can be used for better things go out. But
when it comes to the personal emolument, payment of remunerations, and so on and so forth, we've done so much because we've cut down on those names.
True. So yes, but then there is still room for more improvement. In sense that we need to grow the domestic revenue. And there were there were a raft of taxes that were introduced, but it seems these taxes are not enough to plug those loopholes. So our managers need to start looking for creative ways to raise revenue, or else it will be lost on us. We'll continue this battle and
so now we're expecting the finance minister to come up with a mid-year review and supplementary budget presentation. What should we expect, him to talk about, especially with regards to the debt levels?
Okay, so we should expect, with the debt levels, we should expect innovative ways of raising revenue, innovative ways of cutting expenditure that will not impact on the lives and well-being of you and I. And at the same time, there were all the measures introduced with regards to debt. Debt, we can't do much. Till we stabilize our situation, we have to make sure that revenue expenditure is on a good footing. Then it will bring down the levels of debt that we see. But the banking sector added to the debt and all these other things. We need to also, on the other side, check these things. And it's a balancing act. Whilst we are doing this, we need to do this, or else there'll come a point where all will be lost on us.
Well, so I hope the finance minister has been listening to this particular.
He had a tough job. So
take a cue from this. Thank you very much,
well,
Philip Namfuri, research analyst. Meanwhile, the Ghana Revenue Authority is expected to introduce tax reforms for improve revenue generation from the sector. According to the GRA, these industries contribute about 12% of Ghana's GDP, a percentage lower than the expected 20%. Welbeck Asaria Samoa is Chief Revenue Officer of the Ghana Revenue Authority. He spoke with Joy Business at a technical workshop on VAT administrators in Africa.
So much revenue in that area. So that informed our decision to choose e-commerce, for instance. And then for the telecom, we are all aware the sort of business that they are doing. They are doing so much business in the various countries. So it is up to VADA which provides the platform for the member countries to help build the capacity of the staff so that they can audit properly and come out with the resources, or let's say the revenue that is actually needed to generate or to develop the various member states. So once we know that if the staff is well equipped with the skills, they can deliver to get revenue for the various states, I think it will be proper that we do such workshops to help the various states.
It's live on the marketplace. Now, some smallholder farmers across the Bono region are calling on government to pay more attention to them to help achieve the Sustainable Development Goal 2. It aims at ending hunger, achieving food security, improving nutrition, and promoting sustainable agriculture. According to the farmers, their contribution to the national economy also appeared to be unrecognized. The smallholder farmers in the Bono region were interacting with our correspondent, Nesta Kafuya-Juma.
To the 2015 Commodities and Development Report by United Nations Conference on Trade and Development, the world's smallholder farmers manage just 12% of all agricultural lands, even though they produce more than 80% of the world's food. The report further says the farmers deserve more attention from policymakers to unleash their full business potential. Yet, in Ghana, limited access to agricultural inputs and credit markets, as well as a lack of access to market information, among other challenges, still confront smallholder farmers.
Government should help the women in Nkwanza. What we need most is funding to enable us to farming properly. The smallholder farmers in Nkwanza are capable of doing so many things, but we need a government to support.
Government does not respect us, the smallholder farmers. We bring 1, 2, or 3 together before everything becomes perfect. But if we, the smallholder farmers, are not being recognized, especially on Farmers' Day, then food security will elude us.
Many people are not interested in farming, but we at Degedege are ready to produce more to feed the urban people. If only the authorities are ready to assist us, we will do our best.
Dealing with the challenges facing smallholder farmers in Ghana can hardly succeed without paying particular attention to women smallholder farmers. Overcoming these challenges will also require the building of networks of agro dealers to supply farmers with essential agricultural inputs such as improved seeds and fertilizers. Nesta Kafuya-Juma's report for Joy Business.
Let's now turn attention to some oil and gas news. A survey conducted by the Natural Resources Governance Institute and some civil society organizations indicates that though government has been transparent enough with the recent bidding round process for oil blocks in the western region, it has failed to provide more justification for the minister's discretional powers. The surveyors are of the view that this development has undermined the quality of the bidding process. The report also captures the pre-qualification stage of the entire bid and licensing round. Now, my colleague Ebenezer Sabute is at the launch of the report and is joining us live with some more details of the findings. Now, Ebenezer, you're welcome to the marketplace. Now, what are the other findings of this report?
Hi, Abwaji.
All right, so what can you
tell us? So other findings of this report indicate that the 5% party from the local companies has been very difficult to come by. Many local companies are not able to meet with this 5% requirement. So there is the need for a review. The chairman of the Public Interest and Accountability Committee, who also serves as a co-chair of this civil society organization, has been calling for a review, a certain review of that 5%, so that at least when we move to the subsequent years, then the local companies may be required to pay more. But for now, he thinks it should be reviewed downwards so that at least we can have local people participating in the bidding process. There was also an issue about data, the fact that there has been a low data on the oil blocks, and that's the reason why the coverage has been very low, I mean, so to speak. So he was saying that there's a need for government to invest in data so that we can have more companies coming on board for the bidding process.
Now, Ebenezer, if you're talking about data collection, which institution or which agency is responsible for this data? Is it the Geological Survey Department or what other agency? And then aside from that, which percentage are they advocating apart from the 5% that they are talking about not being enough?
Like I indicated earlier, they are calling for either a 3% or a 2%, anything below the 5%, because it seems the 5% is too high for our local companies. And looking at how young our oil and gas industry is, 5% at start is a bit higher. And that is why we don't have most of our local companies participating in the bidding process. We all recall that since ExxonMobil came into the country, they've been looking for, as part of the requirement, they were supposed to have some partnership and all that, but they've gotten only go, and it hasn't been easy for them to get local companies to apply for participation. The other issue about data, they are putting the blame on the doorstep of the Ministry of Energy. They are saying that since the Ministry of Energy is the oversight, responsible institution for the oil and gas sector, they should be able to require the necessary data. They should be able to get the institution responsible for this data. So it could be the Geological Department, but all has to be a directive from the Ministry of Energy because they have oversight responsibility over the industry here in Ghana.
All right, so you mentioned the fact that, these civil society are lauding the transparency with which the bidding process has taken place so far, but they are actually, challenging or criticizing the discretionary powers of ministers. What is part of, or what part of the discretionary powers of the ministers are they referring to, and what do they want to be done?
No, they are not challenging the powers of the minister. They are rather saying that his discretionary power, it's not too transparent. So when we talk of discretionary power, here the minister has the power to negotiate. When in the case of a direct negotiation, the minister uses his discretionary power to give to whichever company may suit their requirement. So what the CSOs are saying is that at least more information needs to be given about this company, and then also this discretionary power should be justified that if I'm giving the block to company A based on these 1, 2, 3 reasons, I think the company is justified to take that block. So that's the discretionary power that they are talking about, but not that they are challenging that power. No, they cannot challenge that power. They are only saying that there should be more information on the companies and then also on the justification of giving the oil block to the company. So we may all recall that most of these companies came in first for competitive bidding, but at the end of the day, they went into direct negotiation. So this is what they are talking about. At least we should have more information about the companies, their beneficial ownership and all that, so that we can know that we can be sure of transparency in the process.
All right. Many thanks for that update. Mr. Sabote, of course, we'll get some more from the report when you get back to the office. And on that note, we wrap up this afternoon's edition of The Marketplace. Many thanks for watching. My name is Emmanuel Abuaji. Let's meet again same time tomorrow. Have a good afternoon.